Hey all, thanks for tuning in to my new channel, Chaplain on the Spectrum. The reason that I had started this channel is because as somebody that's on the higher functioning end of the autism spectrum or level one, um, functioning level designations vary based off of preference. But as somebody that is autistic, I am beginning an internship for CPE, which, in case you don't know, that's clinical pastoral education for chaplaincy at a local hospital. I'm also in seminary at the moment as I am preparing for ministry in the United Methodist Church. And I wanted to start this channel to as sort of a vlog to put myself out there. Along with that, I'm a visual artist, and so I'd hope to network in both those areas and just kind of go from there and maybe document my journey and reach out to people and if at all possible maybe kind of shed some light into what people in the autistic community are capable of doing. And so I want to keep these not too long, but not too short. Uh, and this will be the first of many weekly uploads on Sunday. Right now it's Sunday evening, but preferably Sunday afternoon, right after church, where I just come and I just give an update of what I am doing as a seminarian that is going through CPE training and internship, which will include classwork as well as hands on work on top of working and on top of being in seminary and also being a visual artist. I'll get into that part later. But yeah, and so I just figure I'd go ahead and start off by giving an intro of who I am, what this channel is, what it isn't, and just kind of go over the process. So this is, intro to Chaplain on the Spectrum. My name is Joe, or Joseph, Chaplain on the Spectrum, to be shortly. And I just want to start off by saying that this is not a theology channel. Um, I'll reference my spiritual journey and talk about that and how that correlates to everything. But this is not a place to discuss theology. This is not a place to discuss denominational issues. This is just my experience. This is kind of a journal, and hopefully, people can get help from whatever walk of life, faith background, somebody that has a Christian faith, somebody that's a Methodist, somebody that's in the autistic community, just generally reaching out. And I want to make it about that. And hopefully, in the process, I can get better at YouTubing because I would like to do something that does correlate to my artistic endeavors as well as what I'm doing in seminary. And so that is that. And recently, I was accepted into a clinical pastoral education internship at a local hospital that's near the Starbucks, where I also work, pays my bills, and takes care of insurance, and gives me free coffee, keeps me caffeinated. And a woman came up who was from the hospital who had a schmuck on, and it said pastoral care staff on it. So I went ahead and asked her if she was a chaplain and what she did, and she told me a little bit about her background. And I went ahead and told her what I'm doing, that I'm in seminary and that I'm not quite sure where the pieces all fit in with that, but I know I want to do ministry vocationally, concentric circles as a Methodist, going into pastoral, specializing in some kind of chaplaincy. And I'd like to do something that relates to mental health because the seminary that I am attending offers a MA in mental health counseling program as well as the Master of Divinity, which I'm in, and I would like to combine the two utilizing the elective requirements as counseling courses. And then that way I can kind of stand a gap where mental health might be not necessarily accessible to people, but also uh, where the church has not necessarily handled mental health or just hasn't had the right equipping and use my giftings and strength there. And that could look like anything from, working in a mental health clinic and doing pastoral work to um, being a pastor that can offer someone qualified mental health input in some kind of counseling capacity. It could look like chaplaincy in a psych ward or just chaplaincy wherever. And so those are details that will get worked out as I move along my journey. But right now, this is the basic trajectory. And I would like to talk about my experience as an autistic person and also my spiritual journey. I was officially diagnosed, I'm 29, and I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when I was 17 through my high school. I was living with my sister at the time. I'd moved out of my mom's, and that's where I ended up. And uh, they had noticed some difficulties in integrating with the group setting and some things that were holding back, but it wasn't intellectual things. It was more of it wasn't not wanting to get along with people. It was not knowing how to interact. Like I'm naturally somewhat extroverted. I consider myself more of an ambivert, which is a little bit of extroversion and ambivert, and a little bit of extroversion and introversion combined. But they noticed that I was trying, but I didn't really. It wasn't clicking, and I was then ran through some tests, which ended up their suspicions were validated by I think the paperwork says National Board of Psychologists, something like that. It's from 2009, I believe, 2008, 2009. And it stated that, yes, I show enough symptoms to be diagnosed with. And they called in a psychologist who gave me the diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome, which was suspected for a long time, but different people have different ideas. And then when I was about 20, 24, yeah, 24, I was living in Maine at the time, and I was working two jobs, wasn't sleeping properly, and I ended up enlisting in the military. And after getting a high score on my ASVAB, about 82, and having a GED, I didn't end up actually graduating. I was encouraged by some recruiters for the Navy to go ahead and hide any previous diagnoses. And as I entered with feet problems, athlete's foot that was cutting on my feet real bad, which only got worse in boot camp, I had to go get some medical reviews, and some other things got noticed as far as things I wasn't picking up on in boot camp. And long story short, it got found out that I have a formal diagnosis of previously Asperger's syndrome. Now with the change in the DSM-4 diagnostic manual to the DSM-5, it is now simply autism spectrum disorder. That got revisited, and also PTSD, which I'm not going to get into that. That's a whole nother topic I would have to spend time delving into. And getting out of the military, there was kind of a period of kind of plummeting, not good. Um, I had some church experience that didn't turn out well when I was in New England, and did a 180 on God in my personal life. Um, and but coming back and coming to a really kind of desperate place, a chain of events happened. And long story short, when I'm 27, I get back into church in the United Methodist Church here in Oklahoma, and I just kind of apply myself, and I feel called to ministry, Christian ministry, as a Christian. And Asbury Theological Seminary, located in Wilmore, Kentucky, opened a extension site where you can do partial online hybrid courses, and then once a semester they'll fly a couple professors in, and bada bing bada boom, they'll show up at Asbury United Methodist Church, and you have to go do an intensive. And I'll do that combined with online work, and 1/3 of my coursework will have to either be in Florida or Kentucky, where they have the actual seminaries located, and that'll all get worked out, just one thing at a time. And so having a GED, that was kind of difficult getting in, but they had told me that they have a clause if you are academically qualified, uh, not having a BA or having a GPA that's lower than 3.0, then you can prove yourself that you're academically qualified. They will consider you. And so I went ahead and wrote a very long essay, which you have to do. And in the final prompt, they ask you, like, if you don't have a BA or your GPA is lower than 3.0 from a BA, what evidence can you give that you are able to academically perform? And I just put that I feel like this essay is proof enough, but if you remain unconvinced, I can show you my ASVAB scores from the military. And then I just put a quote of John Wesley talking to William Wilberforce in his last letter, about how, in quoting Romans 8, if God be for you, who can be against you? And then I just put, if this is God's will, then that, the military, was not. And so it's kind of like, that wasn't God's will at that time, but that gave me some kind of academic credentials from the ASVAB scores that I could then show to a graduate level theological institution, which sort of really just worked out with the grace of God and personal application. I was able to get accepted, which is really really nice. And I've looked at guys like Lamar Hardwick, who is known as the autism pastor, which is something that was kind of put on him by people that were viewing his blog, and it just sounded good, and so he picked up on that. Stephanie Bethany, she has a good YouTube channel, as well as just non-Christian autism YouTube channels, blogs, and vlogs. Uh, the Aspie World is good. I may be pronouncing this wrong, but Yo Sam D Sam, whatever, however you say that, her YouTube channel is really really good. So there's a number of resources out there, and my goal here, as I stated early on, is to give the experience of a high functioning autistic person, um, going into ministry, but chaplaincy. And it's all about people. That particular job is, um, and you can't get a more people oriented area of ministry than that. And then, as in a high functioning autistic person, the number one area where our diagnosis shows up is in our interaction with other people. And so, I've done a lot of work utilizing specifically CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as working in retail jobs like Walmart, even some 7-Eleven experience, working at Starbucks, where you have to learn how to talk to people, or you're just not going to be able to do your job, basically. And that has all helped me to really make up for areas I wouldn't know how to get in, or know how to, I guess you would say, apply yourself properly on the job. Um, and then just wanting to interact with people. One of the main misconceptions that I think a lot of people have about ASD is that, we don't want to interact with people, which is actually very, very, very untrue. A lot of us want relationships with people very, very much. We just don't know how to interact in what would be a socially appropriate way. We don't have the natural skill set. And it's more stuff for me, it's been more stuff I've had to learn through practice, through discipline, through research of what is and is not appropriate. Um, I like to say that I've had a lot of trial and error, where trial is spelled all lowercase and error is spelled with a big fat uppercase. And just kind of learning what does and doesn't work, and then having the incentive of wanting to interact, and then the drive of, I'm not going to give up on myself. One book a therapist gave me was, dealing with was anxiety and depression, overcoming anxiety and depression on the autism spectrum using CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. That may not work for everybody. There was somebody at my church actually asked me if I could give them the book or refer it, and I said, well, my number one thing would be, talk to your therapist. If you have access to a mental health professional, talk to them before you start using certain forms of therapy, because I'm just a friend. Right now, I don't have professional credentials. I'm just in school trying to, follow God's leading, and also apply myself so that I can help more people. And just kind of make the world that I live in a better place, so that when I go in the by and by, when my spirit goes back to the Lord, I can have made a positive spiritual and also practical impression on the world that's been left behind me. Um, and so, yeah, no, that's what I'm about. Now I've used up the 15 minutes. I want to keep it 20 to 30 minutes. The main issue of this channel is to kind of log what has been what has been my journey for the past week, and I can't really do a whole lot of that in relation to the upcoming CPE internship. So I'll just kind of go ahead and continue the overview of what I have in the process of CBT of the process of CPE, not CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, but CPE, clinical pastoral education. And so I mentioned Cat Talent. I said her name. I'm gonna have to. I mentioned the lady that has been that helped me get the position that I have, um, and how that really helped me at the Starbucks where I work. And then from there, I had to write a lot of paperwork. I had to give a 5 page essay on my religious experience, my religious background. Then I had to give a 3 page one on people on experiences that have impacted me, people or experiences, three specifically. Then I had to give another one about time that I helped somebody. And so I talked about Pastor Jeremy Folda at First United Methodist Tulsa. Great guy. He is the executive pastor. He has a Master of Divinity as well as an MA in mental health counseling, as well as a bachelor's in political science, and finished his doctorate of ministry. Real smart guy. I mentioned his wife, Meredith, um, who, along with Jeremy, has really helped me to enroll. She works as a advising counselor, I guess you would call it, at the Tulsa Extension site of Asbury Seminary, which is not connected to, is is located at Asbury United Methodist Church. It's kind of an interesting little nuance in how they got the name Asbury and how that splits up, which I won't get into. And then I mentioned my friend Zach, not mentioning his last name uh, this time, who impacted me. I guess you'd say that. I don't necessarily think it would be fair to mention everything because there's a lot of stuff there, and we keep in contact. He lives in my my honorary home state, not my home state of Maine. He we would watch kung fu movies together for my personal taste and movies that we had in common. And from his standpoint, he introduced me to the New England Patriots. Um, Not encouraging this at all, going into pastoral ministry, but he would buy drinks on the weekends, and I would buy beer with my discount at Walmart during the week. And so we kind of helped each other out. We were next door neighbors, exactly the same age. Love that dude. And so yeah, no, and so that those were experiences that really helped me develop as a person. And then I mentioned my religious background, so I won't get into that. But I also had to talk about a time I helped somebody. And it was a rather recent experience where I will not mention the person's name uh, or the person's name because that could inevitably open up maybe some wounds if they see this. But they were someone that I had worked with, and this was about a little over a year ago, someone that I had worked with at a different Starbucks than the one I'm working at. I relocated, which I'm very happy for. I thank God for that. And they were switching jobs, but they were also moving houses. And I volunteered to help them. It was a female friend that I had worked with, and she had helped her friend come out of a very, very, very grossly abusive situation, and was helping her take care of her kids. Um, And from there, I ended up becoming pretty close, spending holidays with him. And long story short, there were a lot of areas of my autism that I did not realize affected relationships. And because of things that she had seen and abuse her and her friend had seen, there were things like my need for routine and reassurance of routine, my rigidity and how I have to have, the schedules that I open up stay the set same way, that look to her as controlling, because and sometimes I like to joke around, have a sense of humor, but I don't always know where the line's at, and also I don't always know when people are kidding with me, and so I have to ask a lot of questions. And so when somebody says, I'm worried about, this happening in our friendship because of my experience with males, and then goes on to say, and then goes on to tell a joke about it after my feelings are hurt by that, then that leads to me becoming frustrated and kind of angry. And then I want to confront the situation, just be honest, and say, look, this is how I feel. But then that's misinterpreted. And then, having a boss tell me, oh, I think she has feelings for you, which, I then saying, the boss telling me that that person told them, and me going and then not wanting to say that, and then me like wanting to come back and get an answer, and those things might have were kind of misconstrued through a rather long strenuous process, um, as just being like, oh no, this is not good. And she had had an autistic sibling, and so when I told her about my ASD, early on autism spectrum disorder, uh, she had she had said, "Oh, I understand." Well, coming from having somebody that's a sibling, and I talked to a therapist about this, but having somebody who's a sibling versus an adult friend with a similar issue, is two different things. And one thing I want to be clear about, and I think that people know but don't really appreciate, is that with autism, you're dealing with a spectrum disorder. There's a set amount of diagnostic criteria you have to check mark on each one, um, but that might vary in severity. And so can I can kind of mask in social situations, and appear to be as neurotypical as possible, um, just so that I can engage probably with other people, because I actually do like people and I want to have relationships. But then, when all that kind of comes down at the end of the day, I do have these set needs as a high functioning autistic person. Um, and so a person can view that and they can say, oh, well, that's just, I don't understand. I'm two faced. Like, no, I have a piece of paper that says you are diagnosed such and such. And, you explain that to a person and then they're like, oh, well, that's you trying to make excuses. Like, no, I'm not trying to make excuses. I have issues that I deal with. Well, you have issues. Well, right. That's what I just said. I have issues. Um, and any kind of deliberate, anytime you are doing something that's inappropriate. Speaking of myself, the proper thing is to correct your behavior, which I try to do as much as possible. That's where CBT comes in, learning to assess those behavioral patterns. But at times, it does become very stressful, and I do become more anxious and a little bit prone to get upset than others. And by the help and grace of God, with the help and grace of therapy, I've learned a thing or two to kind of jerry rig appropriate behavior, but it does become hard. And one of the things that I want to do with this channel, as well as showing the potential of people that are on the autism spectrum, is also maybe raise awareness that we struggle with things that are different than yours. In the past year, I learned about alexithymia and meltdowns. Actually didn't know about that specifically. It's not They don't list that on the diagnostic criteria. That's just something that people on the autism spectrum deal with. Um, Alexithymia just meaning you're not aware of what you're emotionally feeling. Where you could be feeling something, but you don't mark it as that, and so I might try to drag myself beyond my emotions, which is not healthy at all. Um, and then I heard noises outside, so all good. Um, but then also meltdowns where a person, this is typical of an autistic person, is is so overwrought with sensory issues, social stimulus, and a host of other a need to keep routine or routine being thrown off, that it causes us to emotionally just melt down completely, and it could be a lot of crying, a lot of anger, um, just look like explosiveness, and learning ways to de-escalate yourself before that happens and take note of it, but also realizing that you don't choose to deal with certain issues. I choose to respond a certain way to what's going on in my body, in my head, but I don't choose that. It's kind of like I have temptations to maybe, lie, or I have temptations to maybe respond to anger in an appropriate way. But I have a choice not to. And so, as a higher functioning or level one, however you want to designate that, autistic person that is able to work a job and go to school, um, I am that person because of maybe the functioning level. I don't know. Um, but I have choices that I make. Now, on the other end, if somebody is trying, that's no reason to shun them. And so, what I would call maybe an unfortunate misjustice on the part of the other person I just mentioned would be, you should, if somebody says to you, hey, I'm dealing with an issue, your solution of just shunning that person and telling them off because they're struggling, and they're trying to get help, that doesn't necessarily work. Saying I'm gonna cut you off from my life for this and that period because I can't deal with your symptoms. That's I'm not saying that that may not be what that person needs, but it doesn't necessarily help in the process, because that person might just need support. Or if somebody comes to you early on and says, hey, I'm struggling with this, and you just push that person away completely, and say, okay, we can't deal with your struggle, or okay, don't talk through your struggle. Don't tell me about your struggle. Just deal with it on your own. If you presented yourself as that person's friend and they trust you, now you just emotionally wrecked that person's world. And so some of that happened to me about a year ago. And just talking to a therapist, who said, you're very insightful and you're doing a good job, but these are the issues of, condition. That kind of rocked my world a little bit. And so, in this process, as I open up, as I maybe become vulnerable to all of the internet, um, hopefully somebody can get some help. And hopefully, through the YouTubing community, I can maybe get some pointers about how to edit some things, add some graphics, add some cool text, add some lights, what kind of peripherals I might need on my computer, or like setting up a YouTube channel. I'd maybe like turn this into a podcast. But all that's, to be worked out, just like the specifics of what I do with ministry, or the specifics of what I might do with my art, which I'll probably display on here at some point, go for. And lastly, I would just like to read a quick scripture. I plan on doing that. Not getting really theologically deep, but just maybe something that helped me, that's an encouragement. Uh, in Second Timothy chapter 4, verse 11, Paul, the apostle, who's writing to the young pastor from prison, as most people um, agree upon, says this to the young pastor Timothy: only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, because he is helpful to me in my ministry. And what's significant about that particular passage is in the book of Acts, which gives the narrative of the Apostle Paul's ministry and his experience, he cuts himself off from this young guy, John Mark, who he's referring to here, Mark. Um, and it's because he's run away and he's presented himself as not being able to really do ministry with Paul. And now here he's saying he's one of the few people that will stand by my side, as I'm in prison, as I'm waiting to die. And John Mark is believed to have written the Gospel of Mark, where it gets its name. And the encouragement is that there might be things that cut us off at a present moment from doing from following our dreams, from doing what God calls us to do. but those things later on may not only not hinder us, but those could be the things that make us stand out. The it's always darkest before the dawn. The brightest lights shine when it's pitch black. And so be encouraged. And thank you for tuning in. And thank you for coming along the journey with me. And hope to hear positive feedback or any kind of thoughts that of how I can improve on this channel. And God bless. Bye.